For us to pick up people's thoughts, questions, comments, conversations that probably have been in your minds as we've gone through these 2 days or so, or maybe even longer. So it's whatever you would like to bring to this forum. The panel here obviously are part of the conversation and will answer any questions, but it's a conversation between all of us. So who would like to take the plunge and start? Thank you, Sergio. Can you, yes.
Sort of just a little exercise maybe in flight of fancy, but given that Mother Stewart lived only for 3 years of her term as Mother General, and we have the example of Sophie having lived such a long and robust life and contributed so much to society, I wonder if you might entertain a future image of Mother Stewart. What do you think she would have or could have or might have left as a contribution, given that trajectory of her moving into that level of maturity? Sandra Schneider's, at our opening, gave such a powerful image of women, especially religious women in their later years, of having that sense of wisdom. If I might sort of challenge you or invite you to consider maybe a gift or a piece of wisdom that you think would have been the result of following that trajectory of Mother Stewart's development. Simple question.
Who would like to give it a go?
There you go.
I would like to give the question back to you.
Touché. You know, I would say that what I got very clearly from this last piece, Sue, was the development of the mystical. Sort of maybe developing that a more settled notion of spirituality. I mean, it seemed to me that she was seeking that in the midst of the busyness. So I would probably think maybe a sense of mysticism.
I think that's a lovely answer. I would agree.
I agree too. I think if she had lived for longer, there might have been some ways, always within the framework of the monastic life that she was committed to and that was the expectation of women religious at the time. But there might have been ways in which she was able to develop the whole work of accompaniment of retreats and of the spiritual formation of Freya, while remaining, I mean, I'm aware what Mary said about her anxieties about the person who had been novice director and who was just so free and easy. I don't think Janet Stewart would never have been like that, but there may have been ways in which she would have interpreted the noviceship training and other kinds of formation in a freer way. And what actually happened was people remembered Mother Stewart, but they misremembered some of it. And a tradition was handed down which was more focused on the perfection of manner than on the freedom of spirit. And that changed after the Second World War, I think, but was very much the case in the earlier years of the 20th century. A second thing that might have developed more quickly, I'm not sure about this, is just that she wrote to somebody, can't remember who, when she got back from Australia and said that she had this idea that people in society would benefit from visiting communities in other countries. Now, she didn't mean as missionaries. I mean, that was already going on. You know, you were sent off to Australia or wherever you were sent. that was part of the tradition of the society from the early days. But just for a time, for a year, for an experience, to see what the society was like in Germany, for example. And indeed, Maud Monaghan was somebody she sent precisely for that reason. She thought it would be good for Maud to go to Germany, to teach some German in the school, but to concentrate on learning German. And just to have experience of how the society was the same wherever she went, and yet it was German. It was that kind of thing. So now, all of us, before we make final vows, are invited to have that sort of experience. An experience of another culture, of the society in another culture. But it could be, if Janet had lived on, that some of that sort of practice had started earlier. Those are just two hunches.
Thank you. Yes.
I'd like to ask you all.
Fran, can you wait till...
I don't know who wants to answer this, but I have been thinking, what would Janet Stewart say today if she found herself in today's world where there is such immense inequality and poverty? What would she call, what would she observe, what would she call us to look at and do? And let's go, would somebody give it a crack?
Would anybody like to answer? Not just the panel? Or the panel, of course, as well. Carol.
I just have a feeling that because of her whole thing about spirituality and direction, if you like, and seeing the inequalities, and she would see more inequalities now, I think, than she would have done then, that much more will be available for the ordinary people in our parishes, and they wouldn't be paying a lot of money for spiritual direction, which has to be, I think it would be much more, she'd try and make it much more available, and a much more ordinary thing for people to have, not so specialised, that not only religious and those who are really into it. I think it would be much more available that way.
Thank you, Carol.
I do so agree with Carol. I'm sorry, not very good at thinking on my feet, but when the question was asked, I thought of that huge enthusiasm that she had for the missions before she joined us. And then there's a fascinating bit in the correspondence with Dainio towards the end of the 90s, where she's practically running the school in Armagh, ordering the uniform, getting the prospectus printed, and sort of trying to run it from Roehampton. She rushes over to Armagh one day, but the school is down in South Africa. And you feel this energy. And when I saw Rita's presentation of the brother, I thought, yeah, she could have been like that. Well, there was just pent-up energy and desire. But when the question was put, I thought, no, I don't know. I don't think she'd be rushing out like that. And I think Carol's got it. She would want everybody to mine the vein of spiritual things. And that is one of the greatest inequalities, and it's something Sandra Schneider's picked up on the Saturday conference at Heathrow. She said, we must make this more available to the ordinary people. You can't go on reserving it to, you go to any, well, in this country, so much of what is on offer, you have to pay for quite a lot of money. People can't afford it. Make it available. And I really think she would agree with, she'd want to go that way.
I would think that she will put a lot of stress into environmental education. because of the awareness she has for the world, for nature, for creation, and the poverty we are going in the world through that. The other thing that I think she will be aware is about interfaith dialogue and learning from the, I don't know how to say, the poor people have a different spirituality, less perhaps, I don't know if I'm going to say it correctly, less intellectual, but they have a very big, at least in my country, and I can talk about Latin America, a very strong sense of faith, and integrating faith with nature, with creation, and assuming. Another thing that can be also stressed is in who is Jesus, because often we have very poor images of God. Doesn't matter if we don't come from Jansenist places, but we were evangelized by Jansenist people. And I think that will also be interesting. I don't know, perhaps other things.
Thank you, Loti. Somebody over there, Anne.
Hello, I'm Anne. I have a particular interest in the subject that Fran and others have raised, that of justice, peace and integrity of creation. So this is really an invitation that I've been thinking about since I've been here, that I would love to make a response by way of a written reflection, perhaps to put on our JPIC website as part of the international website. And so I invite anybody from here between now and when we leave, if there's any insight or thought that you have had about justice, peace, integrity of creation through Janet Stewart's experience, I would love to capture some of those ideas and see what we can present back. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret.
It's just a thought, just in response to what Anna said, it clicked something for me. When Sue was talking about her desire for people to have some kind of international experience, and her whole thing about being so aware of how people are, her just observation of how life is, I think if that had developed more at her time and just afterwards, I think there couldn't have not been a response to the situations that people would have discovered in countries, particularly, for example, in developing countries, because it would have taken those of us who lived in a very westernized world out of our comfort zone. And I think if that had happened sooner, I think that would have developed more. That's just an intuition.
Thank you, Margaret. Yes, Kathy.
First of all, thank you to all of you, and particularly to Sue. She is the source of the quote for the letter for the feast. But thank you for opening the possibilities of these spiritual conversations we're having. I think what I could capture of the enthusiasm of each one of you for her particular window on Janet Stewart just awakened in me, oh, I can imagine getting enthusiastic from some very little comment or quote or something. So thank you for awakening that. It led me to the question, which is perhaps similar to the one that was just asked, but the way I framed it was from the quote about we bring children up for the future, not for the present. And what kind of future was she trying to have us be about, or the children, or whomever? Was she really focused on what we now call transforming the world? And if so, into what? Besides good, solid persons, that's very clear. Did she have a vision of what that might look like? And then I realized she died just as World War I was beginning. Now, she was at the end of this journey, which I would suggest from the very little we have of her comments from Japan. I don't know why there's so little, but I wonder if that was such a new world to her that she needed more time to think about it and to incorporate whatever Australia, New Zealand was. But anyway, do you have any sense of this future, even if the future totally changed perhaps and wouldn't have become what she imagined it to be? But what kind of mission and future was she hoping for? I don't know if anyone has an image, but that was what surged in me.
I guess whenever we quote that saying, we don't do what our mothers did, we would do what want to do what they would do were they here today. I always wonder, do we mean that Mother Stewart, say, would have lived through what we have all lived through from 1914 forward? Did she have the experience of the Second Vatican Council, etc.? When we ask this question, what would she do? If she had lived through all that we've lived through, I really do think that she would be leading us forward in the direction that the society's taken in the last several years. The focus on doing what we can in the areas of justice and peace and so forth, making education available to more people. There was at one point such a focus on schooling for girls, especially in Africa. Wouldn't she be urging us to continue to push in those directions?
I was struck when I was working on the paper how that new thing, offering the gift, you could see the seeds of it in what Janet was saying. And so those seeds have flowered among us today, and I think they'll keep on flowering. And she did seem to have that ability to draw out from people who they were and what they were and where they were meant to be headed. So provided we follow our own spirit and it's authentic, we're probably flowering in the way Janet would like us to.
I think if she were alive today, she'd be absolutely gobsmacked at the electronic revolution, which is still evolving. Phil Kilroy always says if Madeleine Sophie was alive today, we have over 14,000 letters written with a quill, but goodness knows what would Sophie do with emailing and all the rest of it. And I think at Vatican II, we were asked to utilize modern means of technology to evangelize, and it hasn't really been tapped into. The late Father Ignatius Andrew of Holy Memory, you say it doesn't mean having Mass in a television studio. I mean, the mind boggles at the endless possibilities, and I think Deirdre Raftery says the same thing too. We've got to really get ourselves educated about information technology and how we can put it to use in the classroom. And where we can't physically go, we can go using the other means. Sorry, I couldn't see you.
That's okay.
Thank you.
I have, I guess, a slightly related question. In reading Life and Letters, I remember she was trying to figure out what society she might join, and her critique of the RSCJ was that it wasn't dedicated enough to the poor. And so I kept reading for, and I haven't finished the book, but where is it that she kind of reconciled that, or what is the critique that she continued to bring to her life in the society, or kind of where did she find some peace? Obviously, she joined, but it doesn't say in Life and Letters if she was proven wrong in that, and which is kind of what made her want to join, or I'm just curious to know how she reconciled that.
Thank you. I don't recognize
from the Life and Letters a bit where she was looking, she thought the society wasn't enough on the side of the poor. I don't recollect that bit, but I'm not saying it's not there, I just don't remember seeing it. It's quite true that she had this, as Mary has said, this enthusiasm for originally wanting to go off and serve in a part of South Africa where the African people had been very damaged by the war that Britain had been unfortunately guilty of starting. But I suspect her motives were in part, she didn't want to do anything about making sure they had enough clothes, she wanted to teach them the catechism. It was all about catechism and catechizing them. Now the attraction of the society, it's hard to tell. I haven't seen any autobiographical piece of writing from her about what her motives were at the time, but putting 2 and 2 together to make 5 probably. Certainly Father Galway thought she should join the society. He seemed to have this intuition that her spirituality, her desire, her heartfelt longing for a deeper relationship with Jesus the society was a place where she would find some of that. Also, the society in those days was very much associated with the upper class, in spite of lots and lots of work they did with poor schools and so on. Nevertheless, it was the reputation of being there and a place where ladies could be nuns. And Janet was a lady, even though she didn't have a title. And there was also the thing that Roehampton was in the country, in a stately home, an ex-stately home, and he wanted her to be in a convent where she would have views of the country and great views. And he so that was a bit tongue-in-cheek, but he had that idea of Roehampton for her. He and many other people were busy in promoting the devotion to the Sacred Heart at the time, which was an increasingly popular devotion. He knew that in the society her powers of mind, her ability to teach and her passion for teaching would have plenty of scope, and also her attraction to contemplative prayer. And I think it was probably a combination of all those things that made her decide in the end to join the society rather than the Helpers of the Holy Souls. And she actually mentions another order, I can't remember what it was or whether she even gives it a name, that she had toyed with the idea of joining. But she never says, I struggled with this because I felt that the poor were calling me and maybe the society wouldn't let me help the poor. I've not come across any comment of that sort, anyway. But I hope that answers the question a bit.
I was interested, I can't remember who said it, that her correspondence was largely with people of her own class. And I'm wondering if any of the panel would have anything to say about how she related to the lay sisters of her time.
If I could just nuance what you've just said, Kamal. What I said was that, and it is, I think, true to say, that the correspondence of people, the extended correspondence with people who she had had as novices and now had as aspirants, it seems to be more with people who resonated and who came from that sort of background. That said. The chapter on the lay sisters in the Society of the Sacred Heart, I think is, well, it's where she talks about the two sorts, and she treasures their vocation. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And I have certainly read, and I'm afraid I don't remember these things well, but I've certainly come across quite a lot of material where it's clear that she was much loved by them. I have somewhere in my memory that somebody thought she didn't. And I can't, can anybody, there's something in the province that I have this one person that I've heard say that that perhaps she wasn't, she was a bit superior with the lay sisters, but certainly anything that I've seen written has been the opposite. That she's had a great value of what they were doing. And I think it's a bit linked with every means in their power. She could see that what they were doing in the infirmary, their relationship with children was very powerful part of the whole education. So
I agree with Mary. I can think of two stories where the lay sisters' example is held up to the others. One is that there's a story about how she advised the novices, the ones who were going to be the teaching nuns, to watch very carefully how the lay sisters polished the floors with heavy brooms, because, or whatever they were. Jane likes heavy brooms, don't you? Isn't it you who like the broom? Something, I don't know what they are, but anyway. Everybody had to watch how the lay sisters were doing the sweeping, or the polishing, because of they did it right. They did it in a contemplative way, and there was no fuss. And all this messing around with brooms and not knowing one end of a broom from another was a sign of weakness in the novices, not of strength, as it were. And then there's another bit in one of her conferences, I can't remember if it's in Australia or New Zealand, one of those places, where she's saying to the sisters about that it's not just work that is important. Work is important, she says, but it's the way we do it. And the example she gives is not of giving a lesson, but of strapping a trunk. And she says, we work our socks off and do things like strapping trunks, the practical work that you need to do in order to care for the school. But it's how you do it. And this was where her sense of what she calls the Carthusian spirituality. Everything you do is contemplative, and it's so she had that sense of respect for the sort of activities, and she too loved going to the sick bay in the infirmary and being with the sisters and I don't know whether she was with the lay sisters, I expect she was, when they were ill, and making sure that they had everything they needed.
I'd like to say that in Armagh, where we had quite a big farm, it says in the house accounts that she came down and was able to, the head gardener relates how he could interact with her and how she would thank him for the way he looked after the animals. But we had quite a productive dairy, and Sister Margaret O'Neill at that stage would have been in charge of the dairy, and don't tell me that she visited the house and didn't remark on the beautiful butter and milk and cream. She thanked Fagan, the head gardener, and she'd be able to say to him, the hedges are looking really well this year. Thank you for what you're doing for God's animals. But Margaret O'Neill was the lady who saw to the dairy, and the dairy was, as part of the general organisation, was very important. So I suspect, although it's not actually written down, that she did take cognizance of it. And also in Armagh, perhaps it was later on, we have an instance of, on two occasions, where there were lay sisters who taught in the primary school, but then had to come back over in the evening and take part in the household duties. And they were much loved by the children, and one of them, I think, Sister Stewart, went to Australia. That has gone down in the folk memory.
You probably know this, it's only one little example, but Janet Stewart, when she was superior, in 1906, she sent Margaret Hopper, who was a lay sister and a novice, was sent to Felham to decide where she could open a school that would be the practicing school for the college, which was opened in 1904, and provide for the children of the area. Sorry, I've got a bit of her. Could provide for this area. And she said to her, sorry, is that too loud or? Yes, sorry. She said to her, go up and find out and just tell me what you need. And Sister Hopper wrote to her and said, I need 8 tables and 16 benches, which Mother Stewart arranged to be sent, to be provided anyway. Sister Hopper, Mother Stewart came up and officially opened the school. I had the letter in school and I sent it to the archives when I retired. And Sister Hopper more or less ran that school for 47 years. I worked in that school for 20 years, and I used to have so many people in so many different places saying, oh, I remember Sister Hopper. When I was in this school, this happened. Unfortunately, she was never actually named head because she was a lay sister. And it's true that afterwards she had to go and do her other duties, and she looked after the chickens. But as for being an educator, if you ever get a chance to read the life of, it's her own autobiography really, just that's been photocopied, of Margaret Hopper and her time in the primary school, you'll see just what a lay sister achieved. Her mark is all, still I think probably, all over the northeast. So that was just one aspect of the lay sisters. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Muriel?
Just a short comment, but it strikes me that given the times of Mother Stewart, her concerns were much more focused on individual acts of kindness and charity and helping individuals grow into their greater glory. And we are in an era of speaking of transforming structures, and we can't mix. I mean, she didn't have that input, that vision, and so we're in a different place.
Thank you, Miriam. Nora? And then Flo.
I want to make 2 comments. One is on the sister question. I know of at least 2 sisters in this province who are very highly regarded by the rest of the sisterhood, who really couldn't bear Mother Stewart's name to be mentioned, because for some reason she is associated. Those of you who have done a lot of reading around the matter will know better than I do that for some reason her name was associated with the fact that sisters must not learn to read or write. I can't remember the details of that. And the second point I want to make is that I think Janet Stewart would be intent on exploding the myth that young people must achieve the perfect body, the perfect job, the perfect husband before they achieve the yearnings of the heart. I think she'd want to explode those myths today. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Phil, down the back now.
I just wanted to say that Sister Stewart did come to Australia, and she worked very lovingly and creatively in our primary school at Sadler, which is in the western part of Sydney, and she still, in her 80s, had a powerful effect on little children. I went there to help when I was a student, and the 4th class boys just overwhelmed me. I asked Sister Stewart if she'd come in and tame them for me. She did a good standing there. The question, I just wanted to respond to the former conversation. I think we're on a very significant moment of questioning now, because I can see that Mother Stewart was a woman of her time, and we can't place her post-Vatican II or in the position of the society today. But what we can do is learn from her for today. And I found Sue's last talk just inspirational in the sorts of women we're called to be. We're called to love the heart of our God wherever we are and to help others towards that love. That's our main task. And I've been excited by the conversation here about more people for spiritual direction, more people trained to assist spiritually, because that is exactly what we're being asked to do. Sometimes it's in a phone call to say, can you just come and discuss this with me? It's not always official, may I come to you for direction. But it's being in a spot where people know you're of service if you can, and they do label us with an outtray that says, God is all we are, all we want and have. And I think she can guide us in that by the way she lived then. But she wasn't living today, so we can't expect that all the social justice aspects that are now we're being challenged about, which is marvellous, that we can bring that spirit of contemplation to everything we're trying to do.
Yes, I think that's really helpful. She doesn't have a vision about transforming structures. You're absolutely right. And that's a lack for us. But yes, it's about an attitude to whatever we're doing. And exactly what you said, Phil, in one of the earlier talks you remember where I was referring to her conference where she's referring to this chap called Joshua Fitch, and she's saying to her community, we can learn from him provided we don't try to copy him, because our time is different. He was trying to respond to his age of transition. We've got to be as light on our feet in the way, well, she didn't say that, but that's what she meant, in the way we respond to our age of transition. And I think we're doing exactly the same now. We're looking at this person who was very much a Victorian, Edwardian, who has many things to say to us, but we have to interpret them for our time. And we can't look to her for things that she doesn't have to say, because her times were very different. And she too would really, really be upset if we just tried to copy her and say, well, that's what we've got to be like, and we've got to do that this way. I don't think there's any danger that we might do that, but it would certainly upset her if we tried.
I think there's another danger that she might warn us against, which is she was so rigorously independent and thinking the thing through from her own integrity, from her own base. And I was very struck, and I don't know whether Mieko would like to comment on it, but I was very struck by her respect for the Japanese and her real demand that we listen to what's going on there. And it isn't fashionable, perhaps, in Europe at the moment to say only for women. You know, she thinks it out from first principles. And I don't know whether there is anything that you'd like to say more about. I don't want to put you on the spot if you don't have to. But I think you probably have.
Well, to tell, honestly speaking, I don't know Mother Stuart so much. It's this opportunity. And in Japan, our many sisters know about Mother Stuart through the books and quotations, but like in our generation, we haven't read about Mother Stuart so much. And as I am in the educational place, I quote the good words of Mother Stuart and use them for education. And studying them, it's really rapid studying, instant studying for 1 year or so. I am very much, I'd like to go on more, but concerning what she says is, I don't know. To tell them, can I tell the truth? Yes. There are two feelings going inside myself, and I see the real respect she showed to the Japanese also, but on the other hand, she's the age, as you said, the person of an age, and the way, I think she got so much cultural shocks in the places. And like when I read the education conferences also, what she did in US and Wolverhampton, and sometimes the words, I get a little shock, and it's really kind of spiritual way of thinking, and that kind. And in the month and everything, I kind of sense a mixture of both. To be really respect to the culture, but also, we are in the darkness. we are in the darkness, and it was very interesting because it's the last words in the month. The last words when she closed this month. I can't comment on it, but it's leaving me a kind of echo. And she talks about the glorious church to be. And of course, in the future there will be a glorious church. And then, anyway, it's not late, not late, not late. She ends this, and I was very thinking, what is not late? And that kind of thing. If I find it. Not too late. Not too late, yes. It's not too late, it's not too late. And what would this not too late mean for us? And of course, Christianity really came more into Japan, but as I said, as a value, but to live as a faith is another different thing. So maybe, as I said, there's a second spring. But when we think of, I was laughing in Japan, when we think of spring, it's cherry blossoms. Cherry blossoms, go into bloom very fast, but it dies very fast too. So maybe we are waiting for the third.
Marianne.
I'll piggyback on that because I wanted to, one of the things that's really stayed with me is what Miego's talk, because you ended with saying, correct me if I'm wrong, something about Japan because of the low percentage of Christians or Catholics. Then what is our work then? You talked about relating to people for their transformation, and maybe I add for our own transformation too, that together we become a more humane society. And that really speaks to me because I don't work in a Christian or Catholic setting, never have, and therefore how do I work, how do we work, other people who work in similar settings as RSCJ about transformation? And I don't know if you have anything more to say about that.
Anybody else? No. Annie?
Thank you. I think one of the difficulties that I sometimes find with Janet Stewart is that because she was so much a person of her time and place, she had great difficulty at times entering into and trying to understand other cultures. And this is, I think it's what Mieko is saying, but it's also very, very strongly noticed in her reflections in her letters more than in her, and also in her official reports of her visitations in America, North and South and Caribbean. And she simply didn't understand. And at times rushed to judgment. That's one thing. The other is, I think also, coming back to Carmel's question about the lay sisters, I know that
the time of St. Madeline Sophie was earlier, but I once asked Phil Kilroy, were there any letters of Sophie to the lay sisters? And she said no. Out of the 14,000 we have, there isn't one. And the reason, she said, was very, well, it's dual. Phil gave me one reason, which was, by and large, during Sophie's lifetime anyway, the lay sisters did not read or write. Now, I don't know how true that was across the board in England during Janet Stewart's time as vicar, etc. The other aspect is the hierarchy in which the communities were structured. The superior of the house and the vicar did not deal directly with the lay sisters. Now, when on visitation, the vicar would certainly thank somebody and highlight something, but it was the job of the assistant to the superior. And any communication would go in that way and not directly usually from the superior to the lay sister. Sophie used to, in her letters to superiors, say, and please thank Sister X for the lovely care she took of me, and would include a holy card for her. But that was, I'm just saying that. I don't know that it translates totally, because again, the times were different, and the places.
Thank you. Annie, and then Edie. Annie's over here.
I was just trying to imagine if she hadn't died in October of 1914, she would have not long after been evacuated with the school to a place very near her home, right? No? Oh, that was second? Okay, thank you. So they were all there through the war. But I still wonder, as my follow-up thought went, how would she have understood a world that she had just traveled, as very few people would have traveled in any capacity? How would she have put that together with a world at war all the way across? And, you know, would she have become a peace activist? I think she'd be delighted in the efforts of the United Nations and our desire to be involved in, as we are, in getting the ACOSOC status and all of that. But I just, you know, being such an observant person and having been in so many different places around the globe in such a short time, and then having that world be at war, she would have really probably, I would imagine, struggled quite a bit with how to put that together. I don't know, Sue looks like she's ready to comment, so thank you.
I don't know that it's a very constructive comment or very helpful. Like most people, her world would have been turned upside down by the war, and she would have struggled to come to terms with it in the way most people had to, and probably drawn on a variety of different resources she had. One of them was her committed belief to Britishness, class, the empire. And of course, the empire began to crumble, well, probably before the First World War, but certainly after the First World War, and Janet would have been grieved at it, to be honest. I doubt she would have been a peace activist. I think she probably would have gone along with just war philosophy, which doesn't mean to say she thought that any act of violence was okay, obviously. But it would have grieved her. I mean, she was somebody who did see the world, was observant, and as Margaret said, didn't get a lot of it. And nor did a lot of other British, probably American too, travellers of the time. She certainly saw the world from a convent. She was wearing a bonnet, symbolically, that inhibited her vision. And then when she arrived at a convent, whether it was in Sydney or wherever it was, as Rita was describing, there was a particular ceremony. She might be welcomed by children with wallabies and whatever, koala bears, but that was the sum total of her experience of Australian bush and wildlife, and it was all within the grounds of the convent. So even in South America, although she had a bit more exposure to life outside the convent, she was mainly in the convent. And although cultures were different if you were in Chile or if you were in France, nevertheless it was a French religious order, and French culture permeated much of what was going on inside the convent walls. So she is guilty of what is called Orientalism, a particular Western fantasy, if you like, about the East. That plays out in her writing on Japan. It also plays out in comments in letters about Egypt and the Muslims. And on the one hand, she thinks they're absolutely charming, and she loves the idea of praying 5 times a day, and isn't that wonderful? But on the other hand, they're heathen, poor little girls, they're not allowed to come to Mass. So the whole world has got to end up the way she is. And that's, for us, a profound limitation in her vision. She isn't open to the different cultures and into the whole sort of relativization of what truth might be in the way we are, hopefully, or the way we try to be. But I don't necessarily think that matters unless we want her to be like us, or we want to make her in our own image.
Thank you. I think maybe Aidine's comment or question needs to be the last, because I think, Mieko, did you want to say something?
Okay. Just 2 things. I just found a sentence that I'd really like to just read this, because I said things about it. She ends her month like this. They are in their gifts and aspirations and capabilities as they were when St. Francis Xavier knew and loved them. And to see them today is to understand his burning desire to give his message to a race so fitted to understand it. To see a glorious church arise on Japan, and that the whole of this great empire should turn to this light of the world and say, late have I known thee, late have I loved thee, late but not too late. So for me, this is an echo. I didn't react so much about this words, but it was like it's a continuing thing for us to really go on and on since Francis Xavier came and sisters came and brought us and shared us Christianity, and we kind of accepted it and we tried to live it. For Japan, probably this is a continuation till the end, and that is the transformation, because when St. Francis Xavier came, he couldn't speak Japanese. When the sisters came, they couldn't speak Japanese. What they saw were the way of the life the priests and the sisters were doing it. And through that, they were, what religion are you believing in? And they came into Christianity. So transformation really comes from encounter and respecting the culture, you see. That's what it is.
And maybe the transformation is the other way around. You're the people. Transformation isn't just one way. And so, Can I make one more question, a comment about the war? It's a little niggle. She describes going to the field of the Battle of Waterloo and reconstructs it so vividly, but with such zest. And, the redcoats charging around the building, it's a wonderful thing, and there they slayed the French. And it makes me feel sick to read it. But I suspect it was very much the way war was thought about at that time. But I think the First World War changed that, and I'd be surprised if it didn't change Janet Stewart, because the nature of war changed. And I don't think she could have walked the village countryside, you know, the countryside of her own country and seen the multiple members, and indeed of her own family, who'd been killed in that war, and not be moved, and not have shifted her sense that you can't glorify war. That's just my hunch, because it comes from my disgust at that letter, quite honestly.
Aileen, it was some time back you put up your hand, so
well,
we
do
may
people
have
want
moved
a
on.
cup of tea?
We don't want your comment or question.
Okay, I'll have a go then. Have you a microphone? Well, I've just been reflecting a little on if Janet was conditioned by her culture and background, are we not equally so? And if she, complete human being that Father Galway recognised, I recognise now that she was even more complete than I realised. Nonetheless, she was conditioned. And I'd just like to draw out one anecdote that it's to reinforce, and I don't do it with any unpleasant feeling inside myself, because I admire her and the relations between England and Ireland are very happy ones now. But there was a picture that Nora showed of an elderly lady sitting in a cabin beside a fire. I took that photo, but the background to it is revealing. Her father was the little boy who sat on Janet's lap. It was a time when there was a class war, a war going on, a movement for farmers who were tenants in Ireland to protest at the unfairness of the rents that could be changed just at the whim of the landlord, or they could be evicted if the landlord wanted the land for another purpose, and so on. And Donegal was one of the counties that joined in this movement, which refused to pay rents to absent landlords who were in the House of Lords getting quite a lot of money from Ireland. Gladstone tried to change that. And Mr. and Mrs. Ross were being deprived of their rent. And Janet learnt of it, and she was such a lovely English lady that when she went and visited this home and took this darling little boy on her lap, they were absolutely so charmed that they paid their rent. But what does that tell us about her? You know, both her loveliness and her conditioning. Are we not equally so? Maybe we're not so lovely.
On that note, may the conversations continue over tea, and be back here at 5 o'clock. Is that right, Hilary? Margaret? Before 5 for maths. Right, thank you very much to the panel and to everyone.